morning to all. My name is Dr. Omari Francis, medical officer from City Health Hospital. City Health Hospital is actually located in Tom Mboya Street, Odeon Cinema, first floor, for those people who probably have never come to our facility. Today we're going to take about an hour to discuss about a couple of things. The first of which being just to highlight on COVID-19. Of course, much has been talked about COVID-19, but we're just going to talk about it just briefly so. And then we probably put more emphasis on the mental health part of it, right? So, and you're also actually invited to ask your questions. We'll be taking questions and we'll be answering them towards the end of the live call, all right? So, we just quickly start. So what is COVID-19 essentially? I think a lot of us already have an idea about what the whole thing is about, all right? It's a viral infection, obviously. And the virus by itself, the name would be what we call SARS-CoV-2, right? And it's one of those things that is now actually being labeled as a pandemic, globally speaking, all right? It has, of course, interrupted quite a number of activities. Schools have been closed as a result of it. Quite a number of people actually either have been retrenched or salaries have been withdrawn. Some of the people have also been put on unpaid leave and all those sort of things. So it's one of those things that is actually affecting quite a number of parts of our lives, and it's why it's important to actually take a minute or two to talk about it so that we don't, in this period you find that it's as sensitive as anything. As much as we have the medications and all these sort of things, there are some things we find that we have to also airbrush to make sure people actually make it out the best way possible, all right? So COVID-19, all right? It's a flu, all right? In a nutshell, it's a flu, and usually find that, as with flus, usually find that symptom-wise, it's the same symptoms that you've been seeing flashing across our screens and all these things, the different platforms of the medias and all. We're basically talking about things like coughing, things like sneezing, things like running nose, things like a sore throat, things like a fever. You probably have heard of muscle pains and things like that, all right? All those are different symptoms that actually can present out of the COVID-19. Basically, COVID-19 is to say coronavirus disease in full, actually, all right? So you find that it's one of those things that most of the patients don't really get to have those really severe symptoms per se, all right? Actually, up to 80, if not 85% of what we're actually observing is you get a lot of people having very mild symptoms, all right? Which is actually very important for us to articulate even in this, because we find that we probably tend to pay more attention to the negative side of it, where we're seeing, oh, we are having about maybe 17 deaths and things like that. But it's important to actually categorically point out what the facts are. What are the facts in this pandemic? What are the facts in this virus? How does it present? How severe is it in reality, all right? Such that now, you know, and of course, usually find that information is supposed to be power at the end of the day, all right? So whenever we give out this information, it's not meant to frighten you in any way. It's supposed to equip you with the right thing so that you know how to go about tackling it, all right? Until things have actually gone back to normalcy, right? So again, as I started by saying, you find that 80 to 85% you get very mild symptoms, all right? So it's important to fix your eyes on that. It's important to fix your attention to that particular part of it, as opposed to about the 2.5 to 5% that we are seeing to be critically ill and all that, all right? So usually find that the other thing that we must address, having talked about the symptoms and all, we need to talk about, of course, what has already been talked about quite repeatedly. How do you prevent it, all right? Is there any way of treating it, okay? And so on and so forth. So as far as preventions are concerned, all right, of course, we've talked about things like hand washing, right? Proper hand washing is equally, it's a very important part of it actually, all right? You find that out of the SARS 2003, yeah, I hope for a lot of us understand that we've actually had COVID infection before. We have, the COVID in itself is not, the coronavirus in itself is not really a new virus, all right? Just that the novice that you're talking about that came about 2019. Otherwise, we've had different strains of the virus over a period of time. So you find that out of the, say like what we've had previously, the SARS-1 basically, all right? And the MERS-CoV basically that happened in the year 2013, all right? You find that the studies that were picked out from that time in time actually stood up for the fact that hand washing by itself actually is important, and it's able to actually put away infections by about 55% if done correctly, right? So the exercise of washing your hands at least minimally as much as possible, really, okay? But at least I would want to imagine about 10 times per day would do a very good job, all right? And also we've talked about the use of masks, all right? So the use of masks was actually also found to have an efficacy of about 68%, right? So when you combine the function of basically hand washing and you combine it with the right use of the mask, you find that you get about 90% actually prevention, right? So it's very important for us to pick up on some of these little things, which actually brings me to my next point. The subject matter of the mask that we are seeing, all right? It's important to actually make sure the mask that you put on is functional. The mask that you have on actually does work, all right? For those of us who probably not taken a minute or two to go online and things like that, maybe to understand how you are able to actually test the functionality of a mask, I'll just briefly put in a word. Simply put, if you can get a matchbox, just basically light up a matchstick, all right, as you are, and you put on your mask, all right? When you put on your mask and you blow against the matchstick, all right, the degree to which you should be, the effort that you need to actually put for you to be able to put out the matchstick should be able to tell you how effective the mask that you actually have. So if you put on a mask and you find that you're trying to blow against the matchstick and it's completely going away without much resistance, it tells you whatever you're having is probably not filtered, it's probably not going to work. So it's important to make sure you get the right mask. And a lot of times you find that there are those ones that have been certified by the government. Most of them, most likely, you find that you would be better served to pick them up from a hospital, right? A hospital that you do trust, a hospital that have probably done a couple of tests on the same things. But you find that when you do combine those two things, you find that you go a long way to clearing a lot of issues. Of course, there's the other subject matter of social distancing. We've talked about social distancing, where you actually obey about 6 feet from the closest person that is to you, all right? You find that that basically translates to about 1 meter, 1.5 meters. You find that if you're able to adhere to that, again, social distancing wise, you find that you are actually doing well, all right? So those are the key things. Those are the key things. Let us not lose of the fact, like you find that, again, as I said, if you're having about 80%, 85% just manifesting with mild symptoms, let us also not bear too much into the fear factor part of it. Let us just deal with the facts for what they are. So if you've been told that you wash your hands, please make sure you wash your hands. If you've been told you sanitize your hands, and by the way, you find that as you're doing sanitization, hand washing is better, all right? There's a factor you usually find that the more you use hand sanitizing, it's usually a bit sticky, all right? And particles do tend to actually attach a bit more, right? So it's important to find that the hand washing is more emphasized than sanitizing, and every so once in a while, then you actually just combine those two things, all right? Yes, so that is as far as symptoms and controls are concerned. So you find that COVID-19, of course, is usually aerosolally spread, that is to say by respiratory droplets formation, all right? That's why we emphasize a lot on basically social distancing, but it's also important to understand that there's something we call fomites, all right? Fomites, medically speaking, is essentially any object, basically anything that has been contaminated, right? So as much as we are taking care of ourselves, all right, as a key principle, also make sure, probably if you actually opened up, sorry, okay, so as I was saying, so you probably find that the concept of fomites, you're speaking about things like wood, metal, okay, surfaces and all these sort of things. So it's important for these things to for you to actually take the time to keep actually cleaning them out, all right? Basically just make sure that they are clean, all right? And you probably find that it's one of those things that also, depending on the kind of surface that you're actually having, you find that things like wood and basically you find that wood and things like glasses, all right? They take different times. The duration with which you usually find that the virus is going to remain to be viable is very different, all right? So for example, if it's steel, you find that it usually will take about 2 days or so, all right? If it's paper, all right, and plastic, you probably find it takes about 5 days, all right? And if it's glass, you probably find that it takes about 4 days. So you should be very keen with how you clean about, all right? So that is as much as I want to pay attention to the COVID part of it, because I think that one, the subject matter of COVID has already been addressed quite aggressively. I want to quickly move on to the mental side of it, which is actually the main thing of our discussion today. All right. So what is mental health? All right. Mental health is usually the exercise with which you find that the emotions are taken care of. All right. The physical aspect of a person are also actually taken care of, and the functionality of this particular person in a particular society. All right. When you actually get these three key things together, you find that then we can actually say this person is completely healthy. And that's why you find that now with the inset of COVID, you find that now if you actually go through that definition, you find that it touches a lot on a number of things in one capacity or the other. Either the emotional side, where you find a lot of people are extremely fearful, or maybe people have started to actually manifest excessive anger, irritations, and things like that. If you start thinking of the physical side of it, maybe you're starting to present with things like migraine headaches, back pains, and all that sort of thing. Functionality, are you able to go about your business? All right, are you able to, how are you relating with the people around you, and all that, right? So you find that if any of these things have not been taken care of the right way, they have basically an imbalance actually usually presents, and that is where you usually find that now, as far as mental health is concerned, there is ill health. All right. So specifically, so we're going to put a lot of emphasis on what we call stress and eventually anxiety. All right, which are the things that we have come to find that are manifesting a lot in this season. Right. So with matters stress, what is actually stress? All right. When you talk about stress, what comes to mind? All right. It's probably a word that you use every other day. Okay. You probably find that in whichever capacity, whatever fronts of life, it's a word that is used a lot of times. All right. So stress, basically, in a nutshell, is to say the way your body and mind actually react to a demand. All right. That is the easiest way to define it. All right. Say, for example, you probably find that if you are to take a string, all right, if you are to take a spring, you're trying to actually make it stretch out. All right. That is a form of a stress to that particular spring. All right. So you find that even to a person, all right, if you've been tasked to take on something, all right, it does actually manifest as stress, right? And it is important to say that not all stress is usually bad, because to a certain extent, for that definition, you find that you actually need a bit of stress for you to be able to go about doing one or two things, all right? If you actually have a timeline with which you have to have done something, it's important for you to have a bit of stress so that you are able to work through that, all right? So that you're not too relaxed, all right? But you find that now the problem usually becomes when we get into a point of distress, because we have what we call eustress, which is basically helpful stress, and then there's what we call distress. All right, distress is basically where now it is having a negative impact on a particular person. All right, and also it's important to also articulate as we are speaking. You find that, as we've just said, with stress, picking up on that definition, anyone and everyone can actually manifest with an aspect of stress in one capacity or the other. All right, now, also, to put it mildly, you usually find that now, if you're actually having stress manifest, it's important to actually for it to get to a point where, okay, all right, sorry for that. So you'll probably find that it's important when you talk about stress to realize that you need a debrief, all right, okay? So because we usually speak of kuna ile unapata, we have what we call momentary stress, and then there's persistent stress. Persistent stress is the thing that actually in time becomes a problem, all right? The good part of stress is the one that you find that the moment you've actually done with, whether if it was an interview that you were supposed to have sat for, if it was like maybe you're sitting for an examination or something, you find that the moment it's done for, you go back and actually basically you go back to type, all right? The bad part of it is you find that it is not being relieved, which is one of the aspects that we are finding to now be manifesting within even this season that we keep talking about COVID. You find that now we're having something that is not letting go, all right? We are having something that is a bit persistent, and if you're not very keen to how to handle some of these issues, we are going to actually end up with things like depression, we're going to end up with things like anxiety, among stuff. So having taken the time to actually define what stress is about, all right, so you probably find that it's important to move on to the next subject matter, as part to how does it manifest, all right? how does stress, if you're actually very keen on your own body, all right, what are the telltale signs that you should be on the lookout for to actually tell you, by the way, hapa iko stress kidogo, all right? So you find that basically, again, as I started right from the offset, we started by saying you find that there can be an emotional perspective, all right? There can be basically a physical manifestation, and finally, how you actually relate to society, all right? So if it's an emotional perspective, all right, so to what extent, all right, is there an element of sadness that is manifesting? Say, for example, is there an aspect of loneliness that is manifesting? Is there an aspect of anger that is boiling over, all right? Is there an aspect, is any of those possibilities, all right? The range of emotions that any person is able to actually demonstrate, all right? If you find that there's a persistency within which, for example, if it is sadness, it's not like maybe for 2 minutes and you're not even able to really point out specifically what is the trigger for this particular thing, then probably you need to pay a little bit more attention to what that could be about, all right? If it is physical manifestations, all right, physical manifestation, basically you find that they can present from the different parts of the body, basically, what we usually call systems, all right? So you find that we can generate and present with actually things like headaches, as I started by saying, all right? Some will present with chest pains, difficulty in breathing. Some will present with constipation. Some will present with diarrhea even, all right? Amongst a lot of other things. So a lot of physical exertions, all right, maybe a lot of fatigue as well, all right, that you're not able to put down, you've not really been working hard. A lot of us are having to stay at home anyway, and if you find that you are mostly tired, all right, and it's not like you've been up and about taking on manual activities of one capacity or the other, so where is this part, basically where is this tiredness or fatigue coming from, all right? You need to pen it down. Functionality, how do you relate with the people around you? All right, start off from the family. How do you relate with your family? All right, are there strains manifesting there? All right, if it's a husband to a wife and a wife to a husband, is there love that is felt there? All right, or is there a level of unease that has started to set in? All right, if it's between a parent and a child, how is it actually manifesting? All right, is it amicable? Are you guys actually comfortable sharing the same room, or you find that one person has to be in one particular room and the other person has to be in the extreme end for you to be able to actually stay in the same house? So those different elements are also actually integrated, all right, when you start actually looking at the symptomatology part of it. What are the telltale signs that you need probably to address one of these? So if you having spoken about that, if you find that you've probably had 1 or 2 or 3 of these things that you just articulated, it's important to actually now move on to the other part. Once you've actually defined that there's a bit of an issue, then comes the management part of it, all right? How would you go about basically looking for management, all right? And we have different elements of going about it, all right? So from the basics of it, usually find that, of course, the easiest and the one that you probably find that we keep talking about a lot is usually the aspect of talking, all right? It's one of those things that you find that mental health in some aspect, and I don't want to say that anxiety or possibly more so stress is actually a mental illness, all right? Stress by itself, unless it's prolonged, is actually not a mental illness. Although if it actually goes for long without having been sorted, it can actually end up as a mental illness, all right? So the point is to stop it before it gets to that point, all right? So reaching a particular person or the other to actually talk about what is happening does not make you in any way weak. It actually is a sign of maturity. It's a sign of a strength, all right? Because you find that man, at the end of the day, is not designed to coexist by themselves, all right? It's one of the reasons why you find that if somebody is isolated by themselves, they don't do very well, all right? It's a well thought out principle that one of the worst forms of torture that you can actually put a person through basically is to actually isolate this particular person and let them not basically be interacting with any other person. Say for example, if a person is actually put in jail and they're self-isolated, all right? It does a lot of things. Basically a mental drain that usually manifests from that is usually excessive, all right? So it's important to know when to talk, all right? Whom do you talk to? Is it to your family? Is it to your friend? Do you need to reach out to basically maybe a mental health profession, maybe say like a doctor or something like that? Do you need to reach out to your spiritual authority? All right, some will go to pastors and things like that. All those are different avenues. Basically the point of it is you must appreciate that at some point you need to talk, all right? You need to talk, because very rarely will you find that people are able to actually pick on things that you actually close in within your mind. All right, so embrace that part of it. Whatever is causing distress, please bring it to a fold so that you are able to actually usually find that usually say 2 or 3 are usually better served than one particular person taking on any particular thing at any particular point in time. All right, so embrace that part of it. All right, so once you've talked about it, all right, of course you find that there are other things that you also need to find. So if you basically stress about staying in the house the whole day, all right, it's important that you understand that if you're having to stay in the whole basically the whole day, you're having to stay indoors, you have to create a schedule. All right, you have to create a schedule. What am I talking about? One of the biggest issues that we are seeing manifesting out of this is you find that now, say for example, if your routine was like you used to wake up at 7 in the morning, maybe you used to wake up at 6 in the morning. Now you're probably finding people basically waking up at 10 or even 11. All right, so mentally speaking, that is not good. All right, it's important to actually stick to schedules. All right, so if your pattern was to wake up at 7, please make sure you wake up at 7, right? Because that is actually what your body was actually accustomed to, right? Anything that you do excessively usually will start to register as a point of distress in itself, all right? So make sure you wake up in the morning, all right? And as we're speaking of matters basically scheduling, what are you able to actually do, all right? Whenever you're thinking of scheduling things, it's important to perhaps to a good extent revolve them around things like hobbies, all right? Say for example, if you love reading books, all right, okay, please you can decide for the next, after you've waken up, you've probably taken your breakfast and things like that, you've showered, okay, you can take about 2 to 3 hours to read about a particular book that will be of interest to you, all right? Okay, sorry. Again, we are taking questions, so do not be distracted by what that is about. So you find that once you say, for example, if you decided that what you're actually basically doing is you're going to, for the first few hours of your day, you're going to be embracing the reading of a book. That is what you actually stick to, all right? After that, find basically time to interact with your family in a productive manner, all right? That is where you find that you're able to actually conversate, you're able to, all right? Okay, I'm hearing that I have to actually, basically the voice is a bit, it's not loud enough. So, okay, fine. So where were we? All right. So as I was saying, you find that it's important to make time to actually deliberately make things like exercising, for example. That is something that you're able to pick up as a family, all right? You guys decide what is the best time that you want to exercise as a family. And when you're speaking about exercising, it's important to realize that the easier the routine that you actually pick up, probably the better, all right? Something like skipping rope doesn't take a lot, all right? Resource-wise, it takes very little, all right? Something like probably a bit of dancing, all right? I know a lot of us, African and all, usually find that we are a bit rigid when it comes to the concept of dancing. But you find that it's one of those things that you find that actually brings down your guard and you are able to relate to your family that little bit better, all right? So pick up on particular baby sit-ups, push-ups, all right? Okay, so you find that things that resource-wise don't take a lot, but you find that at the end of the day, they are able to actually pull you and the family quite together, all right? Now, what are you able to do in the house, all right? Of course, there are daily house chores, all right? Find activities to engage yourself with, whether it's the exercise of washing the house, well, if it's a compound, are you able to go about cleaning it out and all those different elements, all right? And then you find that, so you find that schedule is important. And of course, most of us are also working from home. So there's an aspect of which that we still expect you to be working. Please conform to that, all right? Don't get to look for excuses not to accomplish tasks that you know need to have been done. If your boss actually needs something to have been done, maybe a 5-hour exercise, you find that you're needed to be doing something, it's important for you to actually do it, all right? Because it's still going to actually occupy your mind instead of just sitting idly and probably thinking a lot about things that you're not able to change. You find that now when you're actually actively doing one thing or the other, your day is actually taken up, all right? Well, because it's one of the things that we usually commonly speak about, we say an idle mind is a devil's workshop, all right? It's a statement that has always been put out, and it's important that we actually pick that statement up and we embrace it as we go by, all right? Now, the other aspect of things that we need to talk about is basically, you find that if there's basically issues about maybe finances and things like that, which is of course one of the biggest issues that is actually coming out of this. The biggest factor, the biggest mess that is actually coming out of COVID entirely basically is actually mostly economic, right? Because some of people have actually been, again, as I said, some people have been retrenched, some salaries have been zimepunguzwa and that sort of thing. All right, so how do you cope with such things? All right, of course we've already talked about things like talking about it, right? But sometimes there's only so far that talking will take you. All right, so you find that when we take into the human mind and how it usually works, there are usually two things that you need to actually pick on. All right, there's the emotional side of thinking, all right, and then there's the resonant part of thinking. All right, so a mind that is healthy is actually usually in between these two parts, all right, where emotions are not excessive and the reasoning side is not excessive either. So a meet of both at the very center, all right? What am I saying? Say, for example, if you had a calendar at the beginning of the year, and it's important, we all have different goals and all these sort of things that are usually outlined as you start out on a year and things like that. But it's important, if you started at the beginning of the year, you probably want to do maybe like to build a house. I don't know, maybe you want to take your kids to another school, whatever it is that you wanted to do, all right? You find that the calendar, of course, has been affected by what is happening, all right? So it's important to go back to the primaries, all right? It's important to go back to the primaries, because one of the problems is when you're not able to actually adapt to what is happening, then you become unstable very easily, all right? So it's important to go back to what do I mean by primaries? Primaries, basically, we say, are you able to get the very basic of needs, all right? Are you able to get food? Are you able to get shelter? Are you able to get clothing? Are you of good health, all right? Okay, so those are the things that you also need, because don't overemphasize or basically concentrate on the negative parts of them that probably you find that you are not able to influence directly at this period in time. Look at the things that you blessed in, things that you would actually call as blessings in your life, all right? At least if you're able to get food in your house, you have good shelter, and all these sort of different things, all right? Please pick up on that fact, all right? So the other part of it is you find that if, for example, you probably the bills have accumulated, you're not able to meet the bills and things like that, what do you do, all right? It's one of the reasons you find that, for example, you see like the other day the president, of course there are things that he was able to outline, speaking about the possibility of maybe basically taking up a loan and things like that. That is basically a way that you actually find that you're now trying to cope with what is happening in this period of time. Of course, a lot of us usually will prefer not to pick up on loans, but usually that is why I said you must get the emotional side and the reasonable side to actually match, all right? So any distortion towards one or the other, you find that that imbalance can actually impair a person. So you find that at what point do you decide, maybe, yes, indeed, I do actually need to go for a loan or something like that, okay? At what point do you find that if you have assets that you are able to liquidate, right? Because assets is one of those things that you have to believe you always have time to actually basically recover from, right? Of course, you usually find that sometimes it's not ideal, it's never a nice experience and things like that, but you find that you have to start thinking rationally, all right? Okay? You cannot be seated in the house, say for instance, you're not having food and things like that, and you're basically having a lot of assets at that particular point in time, that some of them, if you're able to liquidate, you find that your life becomes that all easier, because at the end of the day, the moment you relieve some form, basically stress, and you find that mentally you're okay, you're able to even think better, you're able to sleep better, and all those basically all those different elements, all right? Now, the other issues that we need to discuss about is basically, again, comfort zones, all right? So basically, you determine that there's a bit of anxiety that is building up. You've determined that there's a stress factor, all right? How do you go about relieving some of these things? Some people will resort to food. There's something called comfort foods, all right? Okay, comfort foods will manifest in different ways. And by the way, you have to also be conversant. As we're speaking of things like that, you can go it about the healthy way, and in a very unhealthy way. So a healthy way would be to say things like, you find that there's something called oatmeal. Oatmeal usually serves very, very well when you're taking it when it is hot, all right? Things like avocado, all right, is usually another, basically what you call a comfort meal, all right. They usually find that there are things we call vitamin B2 and an aspect of vitamin B12 that as far as nerves are concerned, all right, of course, at the end of the day, sometimes you do tend to call anxiety nervousness, all right. There's a reason for that, all right. So you find that vitamin B for a long while has been known to actually have an effect on calming the nerves part of it, all right. So knowing things like, basically things like folic acids. Where do you get folic acid? Basically vegetables, all right. Green leafed vegetables, to put an emphasis on that, all right. So are you able to pick up on things like spinach and things like that, and just basically make sure as long as you're basically doing that, you also do not overcook them. That's also another perspective that you also must be aware of, all right. We talk about basically all those different elements of them, all right. Just make sure that whatever you decide to eat is healthy at the end of the day, all right. So that is as far as comfort foods are concerned, all right. There's something called meditation, all right. That is for, you usually find that now we're starting to speak of for those of us who are a bit more religious and things like that. You find that what usually happens with basically when you go into meditation, it's long been proved to have two effects. One of it, usually find that there's usually what we call cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that is usually basically a stress hormone, all right. The simplest way I can actually put it is a stress hormone, all right. So usually find that, but usually find that when you go into meditation and things like that, you go into prayer and things like that, usually find that it's well proven, scientifically speaking, that usually find that you have a cortisol drop, all right. So you find that you do tend to relax a bit better, all right, at the end of that exercise, all right. So please embrace that part of it as well, all right. So the other aspect of it is usually to find out your sleeping patterns, all right. Sleeping patterns is one of the biggest problems that we are having in this, where we're actually having a lot of people either choosing to sleep very late at night, all right, and then extending the hours of sleep into the morning, all right. Now, medically speaking, usually say about 8 hours of sleep is very important. So please stick to your schedule for sleeping. If before this thing actually started manifesting, you're sleeping at 8, please make sure you go to bed by 8, all right. Don't start changing the schedules or the sleeping patterns, because that usually also has, mentally speaking, it's usually not very nice. Now, why? Usually find that when you start looking at the sleep cycle part of it and the element where we actually expect you to have recovered sufficiently by the next day, you usually need at least minimum 5 hours, all right. Again, we bring into principle the cortisol hormone, all right. When you are asleep, you usually find that those cortisol hormones usually do actually drop, all right. But it's important not, basically that's why you're saying at least 5 hours of an interrupted sleep. But basically if you're able to get 8 hours, that would be basically more than ideal, all right. So for some of us, those of us who've been actually staying up late at night, please, it's one of those things that you want to work on. You want to change that particular routine, all right. So things like music, all right. Things like music also offer a way out of stress, all right. Basically find out what kind of music do you find most relaxing for you as a person, because you have those different elements per person, all right. But usually find that probably you find that those slow paced, soothing music patterns are usually far better. Say for example something as opposed to something like hard rock or something like, it's something that has been proven time and time again, all right. So also embrace the aspect of music, all right. Bring it on fold, all right. Again, as I said, you can also exercise, use it as a form of exercise, meet up with your family, dance a bit and things like that, and you find that by the end of it, you've actually worked out your stress factors, you've reduced them basically significantly, all right. So you find that so for those things that we've already articulated on, all right, so we've already talked of quite a number of things, all right. So I don't know, you guys, you are invited to ask questions as we go by, of course, all right, so that we actually get to pick up on some of the issues that you might have been having from home, so that we see how best to actually answer some of those questions. So at this particular point in time, I'm going to drift a bit and pick up a number of questions that you've probably raised, questions that have actually been raised to this particular point in time, so that we are able to start addressing them, all right. Yes. Any questions?
So proceed.
Sorry?
Proceed.
Okay.
And then we'll give you.
Okay. Fine. So from what I'm gathering so far, you find that basically questions have not yet been basically put up. Okay, so I'll take a minute to talk about immunity. All right, one of the things that we are basically to embrace in this period in time is how to take care of your immunity, how to basically boost your immunity and all that. All right, so usually find that one of the best ways, basically, of course we've already talked about exercise. All right, it's important to put in at least 40-45 minutes of your day basically to engage in exercise. And when we speak of exercise, we actually are talking about cardio intensive exercises. All right, so basically we expect you to be sweating to a degree. We expect you to be panting as well to a certain extent. All right, so don't go for a very slow-paced walk or something like that and actually end up saying that you did an exercise. All right, yes, you might have, but it usually find that the significance is very minimal. All right, so please make sure you cardio intensive exercises, some of those things that we already talked about, things like skipping rope. If you have a place that you have stairs, you can go up and down those particular stairs. All right, basically sit-ups, push-ups. Some of us are into boxing and things like that. Those are cardio intensive exercises. Okay, actually running. All right, but in running, by there you find that even in the house you're actually able to run. All right, you're able to jog on a particular spot. Okay, it's very, very possible to jog on one particular spot. So don't feel like you must be compelled to actually go to an open field and things like that, and so that you're able to get a bit of exercise as far as jogging is concerned. All right. The other part of immunity is basically something that we pick up from diet. Okay, so basically diet, what are you eating? All right, okay, there's one of those things that you find that vitamin C has been widely talked about. Okay, people are basically really going on taking lemon, oranges and things like that, and vitamin C has its role. We are not actually depreciating for that. If you're able to pick on those particular elements, those particular foods, please build up on that. All right, but it's important to understand that you also have quite a wide range of fruits. All right, so for example, for some of us might have a bit of acidity issues. All right, say ulcers and things like that. You're probably not able to take an orange very comfortably. So what do? It's important to understand that things like watermelon, for example, have what we call zinc. All right, zinc is very important for basically immunity as well. All right, so bulk up on some of those things. All right, it's important to understand that still when you go on pick up something like pawpaw. All right, pawpaw actually does actually still have an element of vitamin C, probably not as much as you have in say an orange, but you're able, if you're able to get maybe like a good section of it, about a half of it or something like that, you're still getting vitamin C. And for those people that are worried about the acidity profile side of it, I'm choosing to intentionally maybe pick up on that part. So you find that you still actually do have options. All right, so things like pineapples. All right, okay, also have basically they have a good amount of vitamin C going on about them. All right, but it's important to understand things like carrots actually have what you call vitamin A, which is also equally important for immunity. All right, so it's not about just oranges and lemons. All right, we have a wide range of things. All right, say fruits, basically vegetables. So you find that vegetables, you're meant to be taking at least of what by there should be on your plate should be vegetables. Say breakfast, lunch, supper. When your plate is well balanced, at least a quarter of what is in your plate should actually be vegetables. All right, so the other part of basically immunity, again, you find that some of these things might seem a bit repetitive, but it's because you usually find that they're factual. Say something like sleeping adequately, you usually find that reduces your stress hormones. Basically, your stress hormones, of course, have been well known to actually, in time, reduce your immunity as well. So sleeping is equally important, but at the right time. All right. The idea of napping during the day might not actually be the best. It might be, you might be achieving the opposite intent. All right. So pick up on some of these subtle little things. All right. So you probably find that even things like bathing, all right, as simple and as small as they sound, all right. Usually, bathing has an exercise that you find that it actually relaxes you. It stimulates what you call endorphins, which are basically feel-good hormones, and you find that you relax down. So you find that even as you're seated in the house, please make sure you find time to actually pick on some of these subtle little things, and at the end of the day, you find that you are basically going to be, as a whole, basically you find that you are able to go through this. All right. So for some of us that have to go about on the on a day-to-day, basically having to go outside the house, all right? Of course, we've been told, and we are talking about social distancing and things like that. It's important to understand that going outside is not necessarily a pronouncement, basically as regards to you becoming severely ill, all right? Just as long as you take up on the right measures that we've already talked about, if it's hand washing, if it's a mask that you have, please make sure the mask is functional. If it's social distancing, how do you approach the subject matter of social distancing? Say, for example, if you're to go to the market, choose a different time to go, all right? So most of the people you probably find choose to go maybe around in the evening and things like that when it's a whole lot busier. Are you able to wake up in the morning? Are you able to go basically when it's a bit light? Basically, we don't have a lot of movement around, okay? Are you able to go basically to your workplace? Kama ni pengine ni duka, something like that, how do you go about that? Just an aspect of social distancing, all right? So you don't need to overstress as long as you're doing the things that we've already talked about. Again, as I said, you find that if you do those particular things the right way, up to 91%, you find that you are able to actually prevent some of those infections and all that, all right? So I want to believe that is where I'm going to actually close up our conversation today. You're still invited to actually bring questions forth so that for some of us, we still be able to reach back to you and actually get back to you as regards to the questions that you're raising so that we are able to actually make sure that we are handling the mental health part of it properly. All right? So thank you. You're invited. Have a nice time.
So one of the questions is,
Yes.
at what point do I need to seek medical attention in case I outline those signs?
Correct. Are we still online?
Yes.
Okay, great. So one of the questions that we are getting is basically at what point in time do you reach out for help? Basically professionally guided assistance, all right? So we usually say, again, as I said, you start from the principle. You've tried to embrace some of these things right from home, maybe your family members, maybe your friends and all these sort of things, all right? And it's not working out, okay? So we usually find that a good timeline is usually to say in about 2 weeks, all right? If you've embraced a lot of these things and you find that within 2 weeks it's not giving in, all right? Please reach out to a doctor, reach out to a mental health expert, all right? So that you're able to be helped out in another capacity. Because you usually find that the longer it goes, it actually starts to affect other parts of your system. I mean, things like hypertension, for example, all right? Hypertension will manifest if you are actually under constant stress. It's only a matter of time before you actually basically dive to the other side where you actually present with hypertension. Things like diabetes, again, all right? Those are things that we find to manifest basically as a result of some of these things, all right? For some of us who have, again, acidity issues, ulcers and things like that, because it's for quite a long while it's been known that there's usually an element of acid increase production basically when there's an element of stressor and things like that, all right? So in and about 2 weeks, if you find that you've reached out to the different people around you, be it your family members, be it a pastor, be it all these different aspects that are actually open to you, then, and you find that you're not actually, you don't feel like you are achieving what you needed, please reach out to basically a hospital and seek for further help. All right? Any other questions?
Doc, now, we always talk about the ones that are affected.
Yes.
And seeking medical help. What about those that are recovered? Taking in mind that there is stigma attached to anybody infected with COVID-19, how do they get back to the society and live without the other people stigmatizing them?
Correct. So with the elements of stigma, it must be realized the worst form of stigmatization is usually your own, all right? I don't know whether I'm communicating well, but you find that one of the first things that you must realize is one of the harshest form of stigma is if you are stigmatizing yourself, all right? Say you actually had COVID, all right? You recovered through it, which most of us actually do, a good number of, when you go back to the numbers and things like that, it supports the narrative that a lot of people actually recover very well. Actually, a lot of times you find that people have very mild symptoms, all right? So it starts by knowing who you are, all right? Okay? Understand that you are well, okay? Understand that you don't actually have this particular virus, okay? You think that? Such that now, we live in an era that basically we have different things open to us. Say, for example, these days at least we have phones, all right? We have phones, we have video, like what we are doing right now, online chattings and things like that. If you are open to these things, take advantage of them. Just make sure you are still actually relating to, of those people that you find that are probably a bit more fearful of COVID and things like that, all right? So you find that in time they will come around, because there's that aspect that, you see, once you are proven to be of good health, it's usually a matter of time before they actually come around. But in the meantime, how do you actually work around it? All right, that's why I say it starts from you. It starts from understanding that you are actually okay. You've done your 2 testings, probably the first one you did it within the first 2 or 3 days that you went to isolation, and then after maybe about 14 days or something like that, you had the repeat that confirmed that you are indeed negative, and all that has actually been followed through. So you find that it's important for you to actually wake up to that reality, all right? Wake up to that reality, and of course sometimes you find that you still have your family, okay? So for example, your family is one of those aspects that I want to believe that will always draw close to you, all right? So take advantage of those aspects, and in time things will just actually open up. And you usually find that fear is usually one of those things that is mostly motivated by basically not knowing something, right? So sometimes if you're able to actually shed light to some of those people that you find that are a bit fearful, right? Share some of these informations that we are basically giving you, all right? And it's important that that actually question has come up, because it actually has reminded me one thing, one point that I needed to put across. Please make sure you don't overexpose yourself to basically the streamlines of the COVID basically testings that are being done on a day-to-day basis, all right? So it serves very little purpose for you to, since morning you've woken up, you're actually just exposing yourself to, today the United States of America has about 5,000 new basically testings and things like that. Or in Italy we have quite a number of testings, all right? Or in Tanzania and all that, all right? Just reduce and actually minimize to that which is actually important, all right? Okay, that is to say, basically you'll find that within about 15 minutes or so of your day, you really should have actually gotten the core of it, what you actually need, all right? And make that the thing that you actually work with. So as I was saying, so if you're able to shed light to some of those people that are more fearful, it's one of the things that we are actually encouraging, right? Because you find that now, because even this person that is fearful, you probably find that they are suffering from some form of anxiety. So the more that you spread around this word, the better for everyone that is involved, right?
I think the last one now, how do parents bring out the information about COVID to their children so that they understand and they know the risks involved?
Correct.
Even they stay home, and even the little ones who have to play outside.
Correct. So again, how do parents actually bring about, basically just bringing out the reality of what COVID is about, the changes that might have to basically the children in the way that they have to relate and things like that. How do they go about that? That is actually the question. And you find that, again, it starts from a point of understanding what it is we're dealing with, all right? So, for example, again, this, say for example, you are in a house that actually, you have about 3 or 5 kids, all right? Okay? It's important to actually let these kids play, all right? All right, if they're able to play amongst themselves, probably the better, all right? Amongst the siblings and things like that, of course, having made sure things like sanitizing and things like that, hand washing as in actually exercised and all these different elements. Why we are saying that is usually find that, again, staying in the house completely locked in, by the way, while we actually is the thing that we keep pressing for, you find that sometimes it's not the best for different reasons. So if you find that people are able to step out in a safe way, are you able to supervise over them, all right? Because that is also one of those things that you actually have to ask yourself. Are you able to supervise them as they are going about their activities? Because you probably find that you are able to enforce 1 or 2 things rather than just letting things play about on their own accord. Now, one of the best things that you usually want to do when you're actually engaging kids is to actually understand that they are human beings at the end of the day, right? So hiding information from them usually sometimes will actually achieve the opposite intent, all right? So in a way that does not bring about fear, all right? Just explain the basics of it, all right? Explain the basics of it is to find that there is this element that we are trying to combat, all right? So you find that make them understand that they are part of the solution, all right? You see that? Okay, because you see, when you're actually involving kids, it actually depends on how you want to bring it about, all right? Do you want to instill fear into them, or do you want actually to bring a point of inspiration to them? Because once they understand that they're actually part of the solution to things, you've already done it. You see that? All right? So make them understand, why am I doing this? I'm doing this so that we are able to open up in time, right? Okay, so if we've had an extension of about 21 days of lockdown, all right, I'm doing this so that within 21 days, after 21 days, I'm able to basically go back to life. You think that? That's a positive way of shedding light to something, as opposed to telling your kid, oh, we are doing this because there is a kid, people are dying and things like that, all right? Because again, you find that that statement in itself is probably not as accurate as it could be, all right? Because again, as I said, most people suffer very mild symptoms. So don't overbear on the negative side of it and lose the facts of the things as they are. So as you're passing this information on, it's important to actually have an understanding onto that. Okay?
I think the last one is with the mass testing.
Yes.
Is it, somebody is asking, is it okay if somebody goes to the hospital for their personal testing, or the one that the government is setting up in a different hospital?
Correct. The question that you're asking is essentially, it depends on number one, resources, right? Okay? What is your resource capacity, all right? Because you find that if the test that is being provided in public facilities is the same one that you're going to get in perhaps a more expensive facility, all right, then it serves very little. Okay, of course, that's why I said it's dependent on what is your resource capacity. If you're very comfortable going to, of course, some of the high-end facilities, okay, you can still go there. You see that? Okay, you can still go there, have that particular testing done, and all, basically all that, all right? Okay, but understand that at the end of the day, the testing is the same, right? Whether you go to public, whether you go to private, okay, the testing is actually the same, all right? I hope I've actually answered that question.
So, Daktari,
Yes.
what about we have so we have people who are tested positive, right?
Yes.
And they've been treated and they are back to normal, but these people are released back to the society, and yet there is stigmatization.
Correct.
Also in the society.
Mhm.
So you see, these people might experience pushback, which is a stress to them as well as the people who are interacting with them. So from where I sit, once someone is cured of COVID-19, does it mean that they cannot spread it anymore? Like, is my safety guaranteed?
Again, you realize if really you had been screened and the result actually came out positive, all right? If it has actually been confirmed to actually have been negative at the end of the entire exercise, then you actually have to believe that, all right? Because you are only as good, mentally speaking, as that which you believe. You think that, all right? If you choose to actually believe that, I'm having this virus, it's still in my system, okay? Of course, you've done the testings, and the testings are speaking the opposite of what you actually is going on in your mind, all right? You find that it will prove to be very difficult for you to let go of this particular situation, all right? So that's why I started by saying, now you also need to realize there's usually something we call doctor-patient confidentiality, right? What does that actually mean? It means, even as per to now, a lot of the patients that have actually been screened and found to actually have the virus per se, all right? We don't quite have the names. You think that? We don't have, that's why I said again, we have what we call doctor-patient confidentiality. That is to say, you find that that's why actually, to actually answer back to the question that was asked initially, the worst form of stigma is usually just the thing that you've been printed in your mind, all right? So the moment you're able to realize that you should actually stand above some of these things, like if it is negative, understand that it is negative and operate from that point. You think that? If you're not able to let go of that particular part of the truth, then you find that you are going to actually, basically mentally wise, it's going to be an ill, all right? And of course, if you find that you're not able to let go of some of these things by yourself, that is why we are here, all right? Again, as I said, you usually find that we, the mental practitioners, the doors are always open, right? Open to counseling sessions and things like that, so that we're able to give you actually the facts, because at the end of the day, fear is always actually cleared by facts. Okay? Fear is always cleared by facts. So at any particular point in time when you're not able to deal with these things by yourself, just come in, and by the fact that we're actually going to talk about these particular things, shed a bit more light into what needs to be done, you'll probably find that you're able to overcome the situation. It's okay?
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other question? Perfect. So again, thank you for your time. You are invited again. I want to believe our page is still going to be open for questions, and we are able to interact back to you. Otherwise, wish you the best of times. Be blessed.